Welcome everyone to the Guild's webinar, which is focusing on business insights, starting the year off right. And it's great to see so many people registered for this event. I think it's about 250 people, a little bit over, registered for this event. So that's a great turnout. And I've had past dealings with most of the panelists on this webinar tonight, and I can tell you they are super smart people. So there's going to be lots of value in these sessions for all of you. And of course, the sessions have the following topics. Session 1 is refocusing on pharmacy business. Session 2, assessing the health of your business and looking at whether your legal obligations are in good shape. And then Session 3 will round it out with looking at pharmacy rents and leases. So benchmarks, COVID update, and impacts on your pharmacy value. Now, we do want to jump into these sessions as quickly as possible because we are running to a time frame, but there is just a little bit of housekeeping to get through to start off, and I promise it'll only take a second. We are recording this session, so you will have access to the sessions later on, and we will break them up into 3 separate videos for you. And we do have some capacity to take questions, however, not a lot tonight. So please, if you have a question, submit it as they come to mind. I'll load them up here at my end and get them ready. And if we have time to cover them off, then we definitely will. However, if we are pressed for time, then I promise we will get an answer. We'll follow up with the host and get an answer for you post the sessions finishing. So I promised the housekeeping would be short, and it is. So let's get started. First up, we have John Thornett, the Director of Peak Strategies, who has over 20 years experience in pharmacy accounting. Now, John started Peak Strategies with a vision to build an accounting firm that the pharmacy industry could trust and could come to for specialist industry business advice. Peak Strategies since then has grown to have a really strong client base of not just pharmacy owners, but also pharmacists themselves right throughout Australia. And the aim for all their clients is to help take their business to new heights, which sounds like a great goal, a great aim for me. So without further ado, here's John to talk about refocusing on pharmacy business. And I'll just hand over to you, John.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you all. Hope you're all doing well in this, your evening, my late afternoon here in WA. I hope you're all doing well. Now, this session all about refocusing on your pharmacy in a post-COVID world. Dare we be so bold enough to think about our life in a post-COVID world? And look, you'd be happy to know that Fortress WA has finally had a crack, and there is this thing called COVID. You may have heard about it. That's coming into our world, but all well and good. So trying to get access here, but to flick the slides, but it doesn't seem to want to.
Is it not giving you access, John?
No. Actually, just let's try something here.
It says at my end that it's waiting for you to control your screen. So let me just go back.
It doesn't seem to want to move or do any. There we go. There we go. We're hunky dory. Okay, there we go. Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to go through over the course of this my little session here. If I can flick through, because it's not going to work for me now. It's fine.
John, if it's a bit glitchy at your end, just sing out. I'll just change the slides for you.
Yeah, maybe just bring up the whole slides as you go through, because I'm clicking, but it's not really working. There we go. Oops, now it's gone too far. There we go.
That's all right. I'll keep an eye on it for you.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, mate. So this is what we're going to go through. So we're going to go through some of the advantages that COVID has provided in the community pharmacy world, and particularly how you can take advantage of those. There's a few little areas that I want you to get refocused on that are quite important, and some of them are particularly important and very relevant now that you need to be refocused on. And then we're going to finish off with how you can get yourselves back on track and learn to start to breathe again. So let's go into the main opportunities here. So we'll just flick through. We'll just flick through these points here. We'll get through to them. There we go. Right. So above all, there is no doubt that in community pharmacy scene, the last 2 years have been particularly challenging. There's been staff shortages, there's been unprecedented demand on pharmacy product services. There's been a lot of work pressure, a lot of work stress. Just simply the basics to try and find stock in itself has been particularly challenging. So it's brought a lot of stress to the community, but there's been a lot of positives, a lot of advantages to come from it as well. Now, observations, and all these are observations from my own client base, from all the valuations and everything else that I do. Every state's had different experiences, different pharmacies in different locations will have different experiences, but by and large, pharmacies have experienced an exceptional period of strong trading performance. If you look over 21 financial year and leading into 22 financial year to date, most pharmacies are getting some really good uplift in turnover and profitability. And just think, it wasn't that long ago, in 2 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see the retail sales element of pharmacy be declining by 5–10% a year. That wasn't unusual. And now we're in this period where we're seeing, good uplift in dispensaries, seeing good uplift in turnover, and it's been sustained. I've talked to some clients last week, some saying that their January just passed was their best month ever, which is a heck of a statement, for considering January is normally quite a low month. So there's been some consistently strong trading performance. Now, the next three elements I feel are particularly relevant. I'll mention all of these in one. Now, pharmacy, as everyone has stated and comment on, pharmacy's been on the front line, okay? But as the public as the community has become aware, is actually pharmacy is actually really relevant to our local health needs, because they're always open, they are always accessible. I can always go get my medications, okay? I can always drive up there and talk to someone for free. It's pretty good. I've always been able to get my medications. Vaccinations, which have been critical, always been able to get vaccinations, the rats, everything like this. So community pharmacy's reputation has really improved, in my view, really improved, and particularly the relevancy of pharmacy within a community health spectrum. Because certainly over the last 2 years, the community, and particularly they're engaging a lot more with their pharmacies, become aware of just how important this industry is and this community is. So we're going to look at these opportunities that are right here. How do we take advantage of them? What's our next step? Okay, so I'll get you to, yeah. So this is your starting point. Okay, and this is my strong recommendation as to where you start. Now, you guys would remember this from 2020, the Community Pharmacy 2025 Framework for Change. So there was this document. There's also the market research document as well, and it is a great idea. My strongest suggestion to you is actually stop and go back and familiarise yourself with not only the research, but also some of the key points they raise here. Because these are still very relevant to pharmacy now. And it's particularly relevant to see where your particular pharmacy is and also where it needs to evolve into. Now, a lot of the opportunities I'm going to talk about, I'm going to be referencing back to particular points made in this document here. Okay, just so when you go back, you can go to those particular points and look at them, and you can see what I'm talking about. But the important thing to note here is that these times you've been through, these times you're about to go through, these times won't last. Okay, things will change, and there'll be this new norm, whatever it may be. Okay, so things will change, and whatever uplift you're going through now may not last forever. So let's get into it. Let's get into some more points here. So if I can have the next slide, please. There we go. Okay. So what we're going to go through here, and you'll see with each opportunity here, You see that top one I've got there, the key focus area, which is leveraging brand. And what I'm referring back to is one of the key points raised in the CP 2025 document. Now, community engagement and reputation. Now, there's probably never been a greater opportunity for pharmacy to really get focused on broadening their engagement with the community, because the community has been very engaged with pharmacy, been able to access the medications. When all the rest of the world is shut down, pharmacy's open. Or can always talk to people, can always get medications. They've been there for vaccinations. They're going there for the rats now. But there's never been probably a better opportunity to go and get focused on your brand, and to grow your brand, and to grow on a grander scale. Okay, and particularly when we look at health and accessibility. Okay, it's two important points. And the community is very focused, not only focused on health, probably more focused on health than what they have been, but also very focused on accessibility as well. So again, we've got this great opportunity to grow our brand and to reach out more into the community. And then what I'm talking about here in particular is your marketing strategy. Okay, now pharmacy is generally, look, fairly crap, if we're going to be honest, at marketing. Okay, but there is a great opportunity here to really grow your marketing reach. And so within the realms of things that you probably really need to be focused on is, what's our marketing strategy to go and reach out to as many people in the community as possible, because you've got a great opportunity to build them, to capture them, and to build loyalty, and to keep them coming back. Okay, now there's a particular point a couple of points I want to make here. And we're talking about you being exposed to extra patients and extra customers, people coming to you for vaccinations, a lot of people you probably haven't seen before, okay? So there's a great opportunity for you to capture these. And within Peak, we have this, what we call our Pharmacy Mastermind program, which is a program we've got here to grow profitability in pharmacies. Now, in that, we talk about growing turnover. And there's 4 key points to growing turnover. That's growing your customer numbers, growing your customer loyalty, growing the frequency, which is the number of times they come to your store, and also growing how much they spend, either in price or in quantity of product. And I think what you've got here, and the 3 elements you really need to focus on, is a solid marketing strategy that enables you to communicate and engage more with your community. And that is really important, because there's never been a great opportunity to do that, and that is right now. Okay, and then through that, with more people coming to your store, is how do you capture their loyalty? Okay, loyalty programs are absolutely vital right now, because loyalty programs are all about data. They're all about a customer base. Where you've got customer names and email addresses, you have an ability to communicate. If you have an ability to communicate, you have an ability to capture someone's loyalty, but you also have an ability to capture the frequency, to get them to come back for their scripts, for their repeats, for their health services. Okay, so this is a great opportunity now. So let's flick over to the next slide. Now, the next one I want to talk to you about here, and I'm still going to push on this element of community engagement. And the particular focus here I'm working on here is the community health hub and health service areas. Okay. Now, staff shortages, extreme workloads, owners have taken their focus off this area, okay, because it's just been about survivability and just getting through the workloads. So, we have dropped off, okay, which is fine, that's okay. But there's a great opportunity here. And when we talk about community engagement, we're not only reaching out to the community as in the individuals and our potential customers and patients, but there's also a great opportunity now for you to reach out and look for collaborations, okay? When you're looking at working with schools, childcare centres, doctors, medical specialists, sporting clubs, there's a whole range of community organisations, not-for-profit organisations. And there's opportunities here for owners to go out there to reach out to these organisations, go, how can I help you? How can we work together for the benefit of our community? Okay, some of the best pharmacy owners I know do this extremely well. Okay, but I must note here that if an owner is rostered on, as in rostered on behind the dispensing counter, they're not going to have the time to do this. Okay, it's the owners who aren't rostered on, but still very actively engaged in their stores, very actively engaged. They're the ones who are going out and talking to people. And I know some pharmacy owners who do exceedingly well from this area, who've got some great collaborations going with, local government, with other doctors, health specialists, even with occupational therapists, with other sporting clubs. And the revenue they bring in is actually quite significant, okay? But if you're stuck behind the dispensing counter, you can't do this. Incidentally, halfway through last year, August last year, I was speaking at the WA Pharmacy Forum. And the topic I was talking about was my top 6 favourite performing pharmacies. So these are pharmacies that perform, they just get growth in their profitability year after year after year. These are guys in, old established suburbs, got a lot of competition, some of them from, big discounters, a lot of competition, yet these guys are getting profit year after year after year. Incidentally, in that top 6, 3 were owner operated, meaning the owner was rostered on, actually working in. 3 of them were manager operated, meaning the owner was not rostered on there. So there's the old theory of a pharmacy will never perform as well as an owner operated one. It's not necessarily true, but you've got to get out there. There are opportunities out there in collaborations. Okay, health services. Talking to some owners, they'll put their hand up and said, "Look, we've just dropped the ball on this. Okay, we've just been just trying to keep up." And vaccinating people all day and dealing with scripts and arguments and people complaining and all sorts of weird things going on in this crazy world we live in. Okay, I know several clients have put their hand up and said, "We just lost focus." Okay, use the opportunity analysis tool that's available from the Guild. It's a great tool. Go grab that and have a look at where you're going compared to what your potential is. And it's a great opportunity now to work with your pharmacists, your dispensing teams, etc. Go, right, let's capture this. Let's get focused back on this again because we're losing opportunities. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide. Again, we're going to work on this in community engagement collaboration, but we're going to work on the in-home care. Okay, and particularly, this is now an opportunity when, particularly as we've seen the last 2 years, of people not necessarily keen on going out. They want to be able to access what they want, but don't necessarily want to get in the car and go there. And it's a great opportunity now for pharmacy owners to think, what's another way that we can deal and interact with our customers? Very good example, pre-COVID, post-COVID, okay? If I look at number of pharmacies that I know that were not doing deliveries versus those who were doing deliveries as soon as COVID come in, just about everyone's doing deliveries now. Before, you hardly saw it, okay? And that was a big change of those who got their cars and were doing deliveries. And that really ramped up during the course of COVID. Why? Because they need to be able to access their customers and be able to look after them and service them from their home. Okay, so there is an opportunity to think differently about this. Okay, because pharmacy has always been this brick, 4 walls, here's my bricks and mortar store, open up the front door, hang out your shingle, please come to me, please come to me. Okay, you need to be going to them. You need to be going to your customer. So have a look at different ways of doing this. And I feel this is very important, and this is where pharmacy probably needs to get better at. Okay, some of your big brands probably have the apps that are available. Okay, if you're an independent, you should be capturing those as well. Online retail is huge opportunity waiting. Again, that's not done very well. But I've got clients who are moving in this space and are really reaching into this, and they're going to do exceedingly well from this. booking appointments online retail, okay, uploading scripts, whatever. Okay, there's a great opportunity here because that's how your customers are interacting with everyone else. Why can't they do that here? EDMs, electronic direct mail. Okay, we've got a loyalty program. You've got emails. You've got emails. You've got an ability to speak to someone. Okay, you've got an ability to speak to someone. You can capture their attention. Electronic direct emails. Every 2 months, this is what we work towards with our clients. Every 2 months, email should be going out to your database on educating them and about your products and services, but mainly educating them. And don't forget social media as well. There's a great opportunity there. In-home care, okay? Get focused on it because there is an opportunity there for you to really work better with your customers. So let's move on. Now, this is a very, very big area and very relevant right now, okay? You've got to get focused on your team, okay? I've talked to many pharmacists and they say the same thing. They are very tired, they are burnt out, they've been sustaining this pressure for 2 odd years now, okay? There are staff shortages. There are some critical staff shortages going on. You cannot find a pharmacist at the moment, okay? Talk amongst my clients are all the same. They cannot find a pharmacist. Okay, and don't forget, they've been on the front line, so their exposure risks have also been very heightened. Okay, and so there's some tension around here, and dare I raise it, the pay issues. You've probably seen the AJP article last week, I think it was, and it talked about pharmacists demanding $80 an hour. I can verify with you. We had my managers talk to some clients last week who are trying to get some pharmacists. Good luck. And I can verify $85 an hour is what they were demanding. Okay, and that is laws of supply and demand. Okay, very high demand, very low supply. What happens? Pay rates go up. Are they worth it? Probably. The model can't afford it, unfortunately. But these are very real pressures. And now is a very, very critical time. Get focused on your team. Your team culture is absolutely everything, okay? You need to really show some strong leadership here, get very involved in your teams and make sure you build that culture and really be in that culture and identify what's going on, okay? Engage with your team, have some fun activities, okay? I know one client today told us they organise a team to come over to give all their staff massages in the shop, okay? And others have been out there, they've taken their team out on the town and had meals and drinks and have all sorts of fun. Go have some fun, okay? They're worth it. I know others have paid them bonuses. Some paid $500,000 bonus to their pharmacists to saying, look, guys, thanks very much. You know, hell of an effort. Don't forget about the pay reviews, performance reviews, re-engage with them and really build communication, okay? This is vital. You're better off to up your pharmacist from $40 to $45 an hour than to lose them, can't find one, or having to pay $80 an hour. And your team are worth it because they've been through a lot. Also, very good opportunity to go through your organizational chart, go through your job descriptions, re-look at that, okay? There are some advantages to be made, okay? Particularly if you, as owners, if you can reduce the number of hours and get out there, work on your marketing, work on your community engagement, get out there with your collaborations, okay? There are opportunities to be made there, okay? So let's move on.
They're just giving you about a 10-minute warning.
Yep, no, we're all good. We're coming to the end, so all good. So let's move on this next one. This is quite often forgotten about, okay? When times are good and we're making some money, this area is forgotten about. It's normally we tighten on this one when we generally tighten on this one when things are going down and we need to start saving some money. But I did want to stress here the opportunity to look at automation. And the focus area here, if you go back to your CP 2025, operations, automation, and go look at that. And of course, we're not just talking about your dispensing workflow automation or your packaging systems, etc. There are some really good opportunities there. So if we're looking at labor and we're looking at trying to make our staff more efficient, Okay, we've got to look at ways of automating the repetitive and making sure that your staff are being very effective. And it's not just in that area as well. There's plenty of other tools around that can be implemented to reduce labour time. Okay, look at there's rostering systems, payroll systems, even in your bookkeeping, accounting functions. There's plenty of tools available now that can make all those steps a lot more efficient than what they have been. Very important you look at that and have a good review of your internal systems, okay? Because our eyes have been taken off this lately because we've just been about surviving. Your eyes have been taken off this, but now's a good time to get focused. And so what I want to move on to the next slide here. So what I want to do is take you through what do you do now? Okay, what do you do now? Very first point here. Okay, go to your Community Pharmacy 2025 framework for change and also the market research document. Okay, spend some time, go have a look at that and remind yourself, as I said before, remind yourself about where you are and where your pharmacy needs to evolve to. Because most owners I talk to sort of taken their eye off the ball and because they're just trying to survive and just trying to get through it. Okay? But do remind yourself, get your pencil out as well and make some notes. And then between you and your other partners and your managers as well, your retail managers, dispensary managers, get together, do your SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and do an analysis of your pharmacy as it exists right now. And you'll find that you'll be able to identify some areas that, right, this is where we really need to concentrate. And if your marketing, community engagement strategies are not on that list, suggest you go back and have a look again. Because if you're going to capture the activity that's been happening, if you're going to capture all these people that have come to you for vaccinations, you're going to capture the growth that some people have. Granted, if you're in the CBD, it's been pretty tough. Okay, but this is a critical area that you need to get focused on. Get focused on your teams, re-engage with your teams, and really get engaged with your community. And marketing strategies have got to be a #1 focus here because they are vital and most pharmacies are not doing it well. Okay, and from that, get your action plans, what's going to be done over the next 12 months. So that's it for me. Given the timelines, Daniel, I hope I got within the timelines there. If anyone's got any questions, by all means, let me know. If you want to get in contact, ask some questions, there's my email, there's our website. I've got a lot of content on there. We got blogs, we've got webinars. There's LinkedIn there for peak strategies. Also jump on my own LinkedIn page as well, Facebook, Instagram, and go check us out. But sign up to our website. There's a lot of good content on there.
Well, great work, John. Firstly, I love a finance person that talks marketing because I don't think it happens enough, and I think the two should work very, very closely together. Now, you talked about community engagement, and that can actually mean different things to different people depending on the context. As a marketer myself, we're taught to start with those customers in the middle and to always build our response of either products or services out from there. How useful do you think it is for pharmacists and pharmacy owners to go and speak to customers directly, either informally or maybe they want to create sort of like little focus groups with the specific view of getting feedback about how they're going and what can be changed? Because a lot of businesses, probably not just pharmacies, but a lot of businesses in many industries are guilty of just sitting in a room themselves and deciding by themselves what customers should need and what should change rather than engaging with the customers themselves. How useful do you think that is for pharmacists? Oh,
look, it's certainly in our experience with our own clients, there is a lot of opportunity to be made there. I mean, for example, I can remember distinctly one particular client, and actually a number of examples, where we had one particular client who was doing a number of events in store and the owners were front and center. Okay, and it just went so well. And the owners are out there with their with the local sporting groups. Okay, and they were housing events for their sleep apnea machines and how to clean their sleep apnea machines. And the amount of referrals and work they got from that was incredible. And so if you're not there, you're not aware of the conversations that go on or what's particularly relevant in your community. And you know, the goodwill is alive and well, and a lot of goodwill sticks with the team and sticks with the owner. And so owners need to be there. They don't necessarily need to be rostered on, but they need to be front and center in that store and being aware of what's going on. So totally agree with you. And I've seen clients who have done exceedingly well from exactly that strategy.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I think listening to you talk, if I was to paraphrase or surmise everything that you said, it is that old saying that we hear so often when we're talking to business owners about how to improve, and that is the difference between working on your business and working in your business. It's front and center, and you definitely have to get the balance. So great chat, John. Excellent. Thank you so much. We'll let you
Pleasure.
go.
Pleasure.
I can't take everybody off mute, but I am sure that they are all clapping and very appreciative of your time. So great chat. Thank you very much. Now, next up is Mark Fitzgerald, who's a principal at Meridian Lawyers. More than 30 years experience as a corporate and commercial lawyer has helped shape Mark's pragmatic and solutions-driven approach to practice. And he's a legal advisor to a significant number of national and also state professional associations. And he provides advice to those clients across a broad range of legal disciplines, including corporate governance, procurement and alliance contracting, and competition and consumer law. And he's a really strong understanding of the legal and commercial challenges which are faced by pharmacists today, particularly in their day-to-day operations. And he's spent time advising on technology projects, innovative business models, acquisitions, divestments, corporate finance, and commercial partnerships and relationships. Now, Mark, before I pass over to you, we had a little bit of trouble with screen sharing and things like that. So what I'm going to do is stop the share, and then I'm going to start it again. And if you can't take control of it, then I will just do it for you. So if you could just request to take control, and if it works, take yourself off mute. If it works, give me a thumbs up or let me know. Otherwise, I'll just have to flick through them for you. But everybody, here's Mark Fitzgerald to talk about assessing the health of your business, and particularly, are your legal obligations in good shape? So just take yourself off mute, Mark.
Thanks. Is that Daniel, is it?
It is.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the introduction. And it's good to see that I've managed to get myself off mute, because that helps. Look, I'd like to first thank the Guild for inviting Meridian to participate in this event this evening. Can I control that, Daniel? You're on mute now.
Sorry, you should be able to if you request permission, but if you can't, just sing out and I'll just do the slides for you, because we had a bit of trouble with John as well.
Okay,
so
I haven't been asked to request permission to take control, so I'll do that. Thanks, Daniel. Look, thanks to the Guild for inviting Meridian to participate. Thanks to Mel and her team for organising. I'd also like to say hello to John, who just presented, and also to Phil Chapman and Natalie Ciriani, who are presenting after me. Normally we'd be saying hello in the same room, but look, as was evident from John's presentation, we can still get our messages across in a virtual environment. And I'd also like to just thank everyone who's attending for attending. You're all very busy people, and I'd like to just take an opportunity from a personal point of view to thank Community Pharmacy and the people who work in it and have been working in it for years, but particularly over the last 2 years. The support you've given to the community around you has been enormous, and certainly I'd like to pass on a personal thanks for what you've done for our community here in Melbourne. We can't cover too much today. The session, I've got about 25 minutes left. I'd like to leave a bit of time for some questions after. I'm talking about business obligations in your pharmacy businesses, and pharmacy is a highly regulated profession, both in respect of things like privacy, how pharmacies can be owned and operated, There's location rules. There's rules in relation to poisons regulation. There's a highly regulated profession. I'm going to touch on a few things today that I think, if you can just scroll down there so people can see that, Daniel. Can they see that whole screen? Possibly.
Yes, they should be. They should be able to. Yes.
Okay, good. I'm going to focus today on data collection and privacy. Talk a little bit about your premises, the location goodwill, and some things that you should take note of in making sure that you look after your lease and you secure properly your location goodwill. I'll talk a little bit about ownership regulations and how they can impact on some of the commercial arrangements that pharmacy owners enter into on a day-to-day basis, and also talk a little bit about issues that can arise in pharmacy partnerships, whether they be your traditional partnership of people or whether they be corporatized kind of partnerships with companies and unit trusts involved. If you can please skip over there, Daniel. Okay. Look, first of all, I think it's worthwhile saying that pharmacies, like other businesses, use an increasing array of software platforms to operate their businesses. They have dispense and point of sale systems, platforms to record interventions that you undertake with patients, both for programs run by the government funded programs like diabetes and meds checks, and also for privately funded, sponsor funded programs that are all about educating patients in relation to medication management and adherence. So there's all sorts of platforms that are being utilised by pharmacies, and it's fair to say that commercial entities that run these platforms or provide them through their service providers, whether they be franchisors or banner groups or wholesalers, or even data analytics firms, they're very keen on capturing as much data as they can, because we do live, as we all know, in a data-driven world. It's worthwhile just saying that as an introduction, because I think that what's happened in recent years is that pharmacies, both pharmacies and the people who work in them, and also consumers, are sometimes not totally aware of what data is being captured, collected, and how it's being used. You're the repository of all sorts of data, particularly in relation to patients, because you're providing a health service, obviously. So some of that data is what you call personal information under the Privacy Act. Much of it's sensitive information, and you need to take great care, obviously, in how you collect it, what patients are informed of, and how that data is stored and used, and who accesses it. We're also seeing in the marketplace increasing use of health applications that are consumer facing, that people can use to interact with their pharmacies and also banner groups for things like loyalty programs, ordering medicines, providing prescriptions online and having dispense remotely. We're seeing more and more of this in pharmacy, and also we're seeing a prevalence of telehealth generally. All of this means that there's an increased risk of inadvertent privacy breach and data breach because of just the sheer volume of data being collected by pharmacy. Daniel, if you could please tick over to the next slide. I wanted to run through some privacy golden rules. You'll all have your own privacy policies, as you're required to under the Privacy Act and the Australian Privacy Principles. I really recommend that you review it and check it to see whether it's still current. That's just one golden rule. Check your privacy policy. Sometimes these are provided to you by your banner group or franchisor to assist you in running your business. Sometimes your industry associations like the Pharmacy Guild will provide you with a template. You may have seen a privacy expert, whether they be a lawyer or someone else, to help you with that. But certainly it's worthwhile reviewing in light of perhaps changed circumstances in the pharmacy. One of the golden rules for any business, whether it be our businesses, legal services providers, or any other business, is really only to collect the information you need to provide the service that you're providing. I know that sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how quite often in some of the programs that are being delivered through pharmacy, sometimes more information is being collected than is absolutely necessary. Now, with publicly funded programs, that is programs funded by the government through the community pharmacy agreements, as you know, the program rules govern the kinds of information that you need to collect and provide to the government. So there's not much you can do about that. And you know, as long as you're using the privacy collection notices supplied in the course of delivering those programs, it's okay. But in some other programs and some other things that are done in pharmacy, whether they be vaccinations or other sponsor-funded health services, sometimes it's not clear that you necessarily need to collect all the information you're collecting. It's also not clear exactly what information is being accessed. I think that one golden rule, one thing I would recommend is that you try to come to an understanding of the entities, the commercial entities who are your key stakeholders, what information they access and what they're taking out of the pharmacy by way of personal data. It's pretty clear that with loyalty type programs, and we're seeing more and more of this in pharmacy as we've seen in other businesses, with loyalty programs, you know, consumers expect that banner groups, you know, franchisors and pharmacy owners, pharmacy businesses are going to need to collect personal information, because we enter into loyalty program arrangements with loyalty program operators all the time as consumers. So there's nothing wrong with that. And the provision of that data to by a consumer and its collection by a pharmacy is perfectly legitimate, provided that the consumer knows at the time what that data is going to be used for. So I do recommend having a review of the collection notices that are used when you register, for example, a patient or a customer for a loyalty program, and make sure that you understand what information of that customer is being accessed and how it's being used. And typically you'll see it's being used to offer a range of services and products to the consumer by way of email and text and things like that. So just be aware of the privacy collection notices and the privacy policies of those who you partner with in delivering those sorts of programs. For clinical programs, we do see you have to collect patient-sensitive data, obviously, in delivering a health service, and collecting health information, which is sensitive information under the Privacy Act, about patients. What I've been concerned about in the work we do with various clients is the number of times you see that there's the potential for access to patient personal health information by those who don't really need it. Commercial entities have every right and desire to collect vast amounts of data for analytical purposes, looking at, I guess, trends in demographics and what sort of medicines and other things, what sort of services people are buying or wanting. But there's no reason why that data can't be de-identified and aggregated in a way where personal patient information about their health, the medicines they're taking, is not supplied to commercial third parties. So I would recommend that you check with your stakeholder partners about what sort of data they are collecting in relation to patients' information, because quite often it can simply be aggregated. Everyone's aware of the Australian privacy principles, and I won't go on too much about those, other than to provide some key messages, which I've just done in relation to what can happen in pharmacy, and just knowing that you're all busy people, but perhaps just take a sanity check of some privacy practices within the pharmacy and make sure you're happy that it's all above board. And if there are any concerns, you should raise those with your partners and make sure that you address it or talk with others about it. Daniel, could we please move on? Thank you. Natalie and Phil will talk with you shortly about leasing and rents and the value that pharmacy brings to, for example, shopping centres the value that your premises bring to you as pharmacy owners. We frequently advise businesses about their lease terms, whether those terms reflect the agreement that was struck with a landlord or a managing agent, making sure that the lease is fair and reasonable as far as possible. So we're quite familiar with the retail leasing scenario. We also act for landlords, but as far as pharmacy is concerned, location goodwill is critical. Not the least, one of the reasons, of course, is because of the location rules and the fact that attached to your business premises is your approval. So you hold an approval from Medicare, from the government, to dispense pharmaceutical benefits under the PBS, and that approval attaches to your premises. So they're very valuable, and all the more reason to be very careful about your lease. I think that what I want to talk about here is just to remind people about some significant events in the life of your lease. One of them, of course, is rent reviews. Rent reviews come up every year, and quite often you'll see that there's a fixed increase or a CPI increase, and there's nothing remarkable about that. That's quite normal. But you also see that there are market reviews that arise usually when there's an option to renew the lease. So you'll often see that there's either fixed or CPI reviews each year, and then when you get to the end of the term and there's an option, you'll see that there's a market review. About rent reviews, the retail leases laws in each of the states and territories, for the most part, in most of the states and territories, enable a landlord to only use one method of review. Pardon me. In other words, in the old days, before retail tenancy legislation, a landlord could say that the rent should increase to the new market rent, but it can't go below what the current rent is. That's called a ratchet clause. Ratchet clauses are generally prohibited by retail leasing legislation in each of the states and territories. I just wanted to remind people about that. If a landlord wants to review your rent to market on the renewal of the lease, then that's fine, but it means the rent can go up or down depending on what the market is doing. There's just a reminder about market reviews. The retail tenancies legislation also has a lot in it about outgoings and what kinds of outgoings can be charged to the pharmacy tenant or any retail tenant for that matter. And some common themes here, because all the legislation is a bit different between the different states and territories, but common themes are things like usually land tax can't be recovered from tenants, or if it's recovered, it can only be recovered on the basis that it's the only land that the landlord owns. Landlords can't typically recover capital costs, their capital costs in outgoings numbers. So just be aware, be careful to, and they've also got to give you outgoing statements and comply with certain processes set out in the relevant legislation about giving you outgoing statements. Have a close look, because sometimes some landlords aren't actually aware of what their obligations are. And so what you can do is raise it with your landlord if you feel that you're being charged for something you shouldn't be charged for. Options to renew, critical. I want to point out two things here. The first is that diarise dates for the renewal of your lease, and diarise them well in advance of the date by which you can first renew. Typically, a lease will say that you can renew no earlier than 6 months and no later than 3 months before the end of the term of the lease. Now, again, one of the things that people have trouble with, and understandably, is a tenant might say, well, I want to renew the lease, but I don't know what my rent's going to be because there's a market review. I'm reluctant to renew my lease without knowing what I'm up for. Some of the states and territories in their retail leasing legislation enable the tenant to request an early market review ahead of the period when you have to exercise your option. So you can actually undertake that market review earlier, as long as you comply with the processes in that legislation. And if you do that, you can then exercise your option with certainty about what the market rent will be. Now, the law is not the same in all the states and territories, but it's important you understand that, because some tenants, and I've seen this happen, will write to their landlord or to the agent to say, yes, I want to exercise my option to renew because my lease is important to me, but I don't want to pay any more than this amount of rent. And they'll set a rent figure. In other words, they'll propose a rental figure that might be a small increase on their current rent. Now, what will surprise some people is that doing that is not actually exercising an option. The law is that, and the law is very strict on this, the law is that if you want to exercise an option to renew your lease, you have to comply strictly with the terms of the lease. And that means giving a notice in accordance with the lease, which means you've got to give it by a certain date, you've got to address it to the landlord, and you need to say, I want to exercise my option, full stop. That's how you exercise an option. If you, in the same communication, propose a rental, then what you're really doing is you're not actually exercising your option, you're proposing a lease for a new term at a certain rental. And what can happen, and I've seen this happen, is that there can then follow a negotiation between the landlord and the tenant about that proposed rental. Before you know it, the tenant, the option period's expired, and then the landlord might say, well, I've actually found another tenant. And so you haven't exercised your option, so see you later. Now, that might sound surprising, but it can happen. So just be aware of the dates for your option, your rights under the Retail Tenancies Law, and when you do go to exercise your option, make sure you do it strictly in accordance with your lease. And I'd recommend getting some advice from someone like a Phil Chapman or someone like ourselves or your lawyer, because it's such an important part of your business. I think probably they're the main points I wanted to talk about as far as your lease is concerned. One other point. Sometimes tenants have problems with their landlords in that the landlords aren't fixing things that go wrong in the premises. Whether it be a leaking roof or something structural, water coming in, through the front door. There's a range of things that can happen in premises, including, for example, the aircon system not working properly. That can be quite annoying because you can have a hot pharmacy and customers don't like that. Under some of the retail tenancy laws in the states and territories, landlords are required to keep the structure of the premises in good condition, or condition at least consistent with what they were in when you took your lease in the first place, and also to make sure that services to the premises are working properly. So just be aware of your rights as far as those things are concerned, because those are the sorts of things that can come up from year to year for pharmacy businesses, and some landlords aren't prepared to be very helpful. So it's feel like it's a good time for me to just make sure that you're aware of those rights. Daniel, can we please move on to the next slide? Thank you. Look, everyone's aware of the fact that pharmacy's in a unique position in Australia, in that I think it's the only health profession left where the owner of the business must be a pharmacist, or interests like a company or trust controlled by a pharmacist. Again, these are state and territory-based laws, and they differ between the different jurisdictions, but they have this same theme that only pharmacists or their controlled entities, in some cases close family members, can have any financial, pecuniary, or proprietary interest in the pharmacy business. Now, that's a good thing for pharmacy owners, because it enables you to be independent proprietors of your businesses. And in fact, it puts the community in the expression community pharmacy, because it truly remains a community-focused profession, where the people who provide services, by and large, are the people who own the business. We do a lot of work in the dental and medical professions from a business and corporate point of view, and we've seen in those professions, as you would have seen, the corporatization of some of those businesses, the aggregation of those businesses. And look, it's fair to say in my discussions with some dentists and doctors, it hasn't worked. It's worked for many, but it hasn't worked for some, and it doesn't necessarily work for the community. So you have these ownership laws. They're quite unique, and let's hope they stay in place, because community pharmacy should stay that way. What I want to say about the ownership laws is that I guess with a lot of these things, there are catches. And the catches can be, and the regulators are becoming increasingly regulators. By that I mean, for example, down here in Victoria, the Victorian Pharmacy Authority, or in New South Wales, the Pharmacy Council of New South Wales, but there are regulators in every state and territory, are becoming increasingly vigilant about commercial arrangements that perhaps go further than what would typically be the case in a commercial arrangement, that could be perceived to give a non-pharmacy owner third party some kind of interest in the business that goes beyond what is appropriate given those ownership laws. The sorts of commercial arrangements I'm talking about are franchise and banner group agreements, services agreements between a service provider and the pharmacy business, funding and lending type facility type agreements, particularly where the lending is privately sourced. And we see sometimes, for example, in medical centre pharmacies where there's been funding by the medical centre of a new pharmacy. Some of the arrangements have, I guess, elements to them that the regulators are looking closely at. Be aware of that, because when you go to sell your business or transfer an interest in the business or bring someone into partnership, the regulators will get to look at these documents. They'll want to see some of these documents, and the sorts of things we're seeing that the regulators are picking up are things like, is the service fee in a services agreement a legitimate market-based fee? Does the service provider have a unilateral right to vary the fees? Are there unfair rights to terminate for convenience? What are the termination rights, and are they fairly mutual? What are the scope of the services? Are they clearly defined? What the regulators want to see essentially is that those services arrangements are on normal contractual arm's length terms. So just be aware of that. Franchise agreements have been around with pharmacy for a long, long time. We know that the banner groups in many cases use franchise agreements because under a franchise arrangement, the pharmacy owner remains the independent owner of the pharmacy, and various fees are paid to the franchisor for the right to use intellectual property and for the benefit for the provision of other services. Now, those fees have to be fixed type fees. They can't be calculated by reference to the revenue or income of the pharmacy business, and most of you will know that. However, I did want to mention a few other things that are coming within the, I guess, the eyesight of the regulators, and they're things like excessive control of product being supplied, medicines being supplied, and other goods being supplied by the business. The regulators are taking a closer look at those types of provisions. They're looking at provisions dealing with the ownership of data and the collection of data, because the regulators take the view that patient information should really belong to the pharmacy owner. And again, if you're entering into a commercial arrangement like this, you need to be careful to have those agreements reviewed, because there are some surprising provisions in them. The other thing that regulators do tend to look at are things like rights of first refusal and options in those agreements to the franchisor, which vary between different agreements, but the regulators don't actually like them. And while there's nothing I believe unlawful about them, it depends on how they're drafted. I think we're running out of time here. It's 8 o'clock on the dot. I know that I started a few minutes late. I've got one more slide, I think, Daniel. So I'll try and be quick with this. I wanted to just talk very briefly about what happens when you bring someone into partnership with you, or you establish a company to buy a pharmacy business, and you've got one or two, a couple of shareholders in it, a couple of directors in it. Once you enter into partnership with someone, whether it be through a company or trust, or whether it be a traditional partnership, a whole range of fiduciary obligations will be binding on you as a director of the company or as a partner. And some of those fiduciary obligations, people who are busy in their businesses don't actually think about them, not because they want to do anything wrong, but because they're too busy doing other things. And I wanted to just take this opportunity to mention a few of them. the sort of some of the implications of them. You have a duty as a director of a company to act in the best interests of the company and all the shareholders, and you've got to be careful not to prefer your own interests ahead of the interests of others. So, for example, if you've got a pharmacy, or if you've got several pharmacies, and you've got a service entity providing services to those different pharmacies, you've got to be careful that the way you provide those services is fair and reasonable, and that you don't charge excessive fees or more fees to some pharmacies than others. Things like that can become problematic, and it gives the opportunity for a partner to say, well, this is unfair. Also with financing, be careful about financial arrangements between your bank or financial institution and the different pharmacy interests that you have, because one pharmacy can be security for loans made to another pharmacy business. And so that security interest may not actually be beneficial to some of the owners in that pharmacy business that's given the security. You need to be careful that those things are entered into appropriately. And most of the banks deal with these things pretty carefully by making sure that the partners or the other owners agree and have confirmed or declared that there's financial benefit for them in entering into those arrangements. But just be aware that there can be issues arise. I mean, the other thing is, if you are in a company with one or two other pharmacists, and then you want to buy another pharmacy which is in the same area, but you want to buy it with some other people or buy it on your own, there's this concept of corporate opportunity, and your fellow shareholders and directors might say, well, you can't go off and buy that competing pharmacy over there. You've got to bring us along for the ride. It means that you probably need to have those discussions up front and have good partnership and shareholder type agreements between you, so that there are no surprises later. I just wanted to mention those things. Here's a summary of the things that I've talked about. I've gone a few minutes over time. There might be a couple of minutes for questions, Daniel, if I can ask. And yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to Mel and the team for being part of this event.
Great job. My brain hurts. There's been so much good stuff already, but I've got one question for you. You would come across a few instances in pharmacies where the legal obligations, maybe one or two, or maybe a lot, really aren't in good shape. That being the topic of your presentation, are your legal obligations in good shape? What's the most common one you come across that isn't in good shape that people really should be keeping an eye on?
Look, I think probably a lack of having a decent partnership or shareholders agreement, an ownership agreement at the outset, is probably the one that comes to mind, because we do see occasionally where there's someone wants to leave a partnership or a company and move on, or someone wants someone to leave. Those exit arrangements haven't been agreed. So that's probably one thing I would recommend people look at, is just making sure that they're happy with their partnership agreement. If they haven't got one, to sit down with their partners or shareholders and make sure they do that, so that there's some certainty going forward as far as succession planning is concerned, or exit.
Great. Now, I think it's Thu Tran, you've raised your hand. If you've got a question, just pop it in the Q&A really quickly before we let Mark go, and I will fill out for 30 seconds while that person puts their question in there. So, Mark, great presentation. Thank you very much. Delegates, you can see Mark's details here on the screen. Thu, if you don't have a chance to get that question in, hit us up on the email, get in contact with Mel at the Guild, and we'll chase Mark up so that you can have your question answered. So, Mark, thanks again. Lots of great stuff in there. We'll let you go. I'm not sure if you're going to hang around and listen to the next two superstars, but now it's time to hear from Natalie Ciriani and Phil Chapman. So moving on, we have Natalie and Phil. They're co-presenting. So Natalie is a director at Attain Business Brokers, and Phil Chapman, a director at Lease One. Nat is a qualified business broker specialising in pharmacy, and she has a Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Science degrees from the University of Melbourne, with majors in actuarial studies. I always find that word very difficult. Finance, mathematics, and statistics. And Natalie has over 15 years experience, and she's worked in lots of different areas. So all based in pharmacy business management, including pharmacy valuations, research and statistics, management consulting, pharmacy finance, and of course, pharmacy business broking. And of course, co-presenting with Natalie is Phil Chapman, who is one of Australia's leading retail industry experts with a specialist focus on leasing challenges and opportunities faced by tenants in the retail sector. He's a founder and chairman of Lease One, Australia's only national retail shop lease consultancy that provides a tenant-only representation service. So you know you've got independence there. Phil's acknowledged as a massively passionate advocate of the retail industry, and his love affair with the retail lease sector can be directly attributed to his very hands-on professional involvement on both sides of the leasee-lessor relationship. So as I said, Natalie and Phil are going to co-present. They're going to be looking at pharmacy rents and leases, benchmarks, a COVID update, yay, and impacts on your pharmacy value. So let's start with Natalie. Now, Natalie, we had a little bit of issue with screen sharing before, so I'm just going to start the slides again. Just give me 2 secs.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm going to move the slides back to where I need to go.
And I can get started in the meantime if you'd like, Daniel.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then I'll offer screen sharing for you. But if you can't access it, just let me know and I'll just flick the slides across.
Too easy. All right. Thanks very much, Daniel. Thanks to the Pharmacy Guild and thanks to Mel for organising all this. And thanks to all of you for coming along. I know it's 8 o'clock after probably a busy day at the pharmacy. So congratulations for still being here, and hopefully Phil and I will make this topic very exciting for you. As Daniel mentioned, obviously a great introduction there, but my name's Natalie Ciriani. I'm a pharmacy business broker. So I work selling pharmacies throughout Australia. Phil's obviously the leasing expert for this presentation, so he'll be able to provide some really good tips and valuable ideas for your pharmacy. But what I'm going to focus on is the data around pharmacy rents and what we're seeing pharmacies throughout Australia pay for their rents, which is linked in with the Guild rental report, which is published by the Guild every year and is available for Guild members. So we're going to provide you with some of the latest data for that, and then also look at how that impacts on pharmacy valuation as well. So obviously, as Daniel mentioned, my background started in pharmacy valuation with Medici Capital, and now I work for Attain, which is our business brokerage arm. So in terms of the presentation that I'll prepare, that I'm showing you today, the data is all either Medici Capital data or Attain data, and Attain is, of course, our business brokerage arm. All right, perfect timing for the data to come in, Daniel. So
yeah, I'm having trouble getting it to pick up the second screen. So because I've got 2 screens going, it's pushing things onto different screens. So I'm just going to keep it here and I'll play with it in the background, but you've got control of it now, so that looks good.
Perfect. Am I able to do a slideshow there?
Does that work? Be able to.
Oh, but it's the second screen. Okay. Cool. We can work with this.
Can we? Okay, cool.
Let me just, sorry. See if we can get the full screen there. No, no luck. All right, we'll leave it on this screen. There we go. Okay, so let's get straight into it, into the fun data, because I know that'll be keeping you awake. So as I mentioned, my background, we've gone through all that. The focus today is on leases and rent. And the question is why is that so important? So to do that, what we're going to look at is some data. This is Medici Capital data for the average pharmacy in Australia. This is pre-COVID numbers, so it doesn't include any of the COVID vax or rats or mask sales or anything like that. But what you can see here is the average sales is about 3.77 million, so probably a bit higher than most of you would expect. And then you can see that the 3 key expense items there are cost of goods sold, wages, and rent. And you can see that they're in that order as the 3 key expense items. And for the average pharmacy, or for most pharmacies throughout Australia, those 3 expense items make up 90% of the total expenses for the pharmacy. So if you're looking at ways to improve your business, these are 3 key items that you need to address and need to focus your intention on. Generally speaking, what you'll find is cost of goods sold is always the biggest expense. Usually wages is the second highest expense, and then rent is the third highest expense. But sometimes rent can even be higher than wages, particularly in those large pharmacies where we see shopping centre style pharmacies where they're paying really high rent and they might have their wages fairly well managed. You do sometimes see that the rent is higher than the wages. So what you can see there is that's obviously a considerable impact on your financial performance of your pharmacy is allocated to rent. So as we can see, it's one of the 3 key expense items for most pharmacy, usually the second or third highest expense. Those are probably things you already knew, although a lot of times pharmacists do a set and forget type strategy for their lease or for their rent. So once it's locked in, you see it as something that you can't change. So you don't really look at it or focus on it, but we want to change that in our presentation tonight. The third thing here is that rent is a key factor in terms of the current market. So often when someone's approaching me and saying, what pharmacies do you have for sale on the market? I'll tell them, oh, look, I've got this new business for sale. The questions that they'll ask, usually in this order, are number 1, where is it located? Number 2, what's the turnover? And number 3 is what is the rent percentage? So rent percentage is critical to pharmacy buyers in the market. So when you do come time to sell, it's really critical that you've got your rent under control in order to get lots of demand for your business and then get the best sale price as well. So rent percentage is a really key factor in the current market and very important that you pay attention to. And the final point that I make there is that lease tenure, so how long you have left on your lease, is critical for pharmacy value. And the reason being, if you don't have a site to operate from, you don't have value associated with your business. And particularly for pharmacy, a lot of the goodwill associated with the business is directly related to the location rather than located to the individual operator. So really, really critical for pharmacy value is that lease tenure and how long you've got left on your lease, and therefore is really, really critical for your pharmacy value as well. So we'll get straight into the current pharmacy rent benchmarks. As I mentioned, this is from the Guild rental report, which the Guild publish each year, and it's Medici Capital data, which is in this report. Phil contributes a lot to this report as well, and it has lots of really handy tips for how to deal with your landlord and what to look out for. And as I mentioned, it's really important that you don't just set and forget with your lease. Make sure you get the Guild rental report each year. Have a look at, in comparison, your pharmacy for how it's performing, rent-wise, how it is compared to other pharmacies in the market and throughout Australia. So you know exactly where you're sitting in terms of your rental position. So the first data we've got here is the rent per square metre. This is financial year 2021 data, and it's pharmacies located throughout Australia. So both metro and rural locations and located in all states throughout Australia. And what you can see the notes on the left is wherever I mention rent in this presentation, it's including outgoings as well. So the median rent and outgoings per square metre is about $501, so just above that $500 mark. But what you can see with this slide on with the graph on the right is the data is very highly skewed. So there are pharmacies paying almost $3,000 per square metre, even though the median is $500. And so whenever we're looking at rent data, we always try and focus on the median, which is the midpoint of the sample. So there's 50% of the sample is less than that, 50% is above. And the reason we focus on the median is because averages are can be highly skewed by outliers. So when you've got a skewed distribution such as this, the outliers pull the average up. So if you're comparing rent to the average, then you're not using an accurate figure. If we then look to the next slide, which is the rent as a percentage of turnover, this is again financial year 2021 data. What you can see here is that Again, it's a very skewed distribution. The median is 3.87, so 3.87% of turnover is the median rent for an Australian pharmacy. But again, if you look, there are some pharmacies paying up to 18% as a percentage of turnover in rent. So they're the pharmacies where their rent is likely to be their second highest expense, which will be higher than their wages expense. So you can see a lot of variation in the data. And a lot of that's coming to the type of locations where you're located, as well as the size of the shop. So you can see this slide here, which indicates the median rent and outgoings by shopping centre type. And you can see as the shopping centre gets larger, the median rent and outgoings also increases. And it's quite a nice curve. I quite like that one, how it looks, but it just shows you that obviously your shopping centre type is going to significantly impact your rent and outgoings. So as I mentioned, I really encourage all of you to look at the Guild rental report, which is free for Guild members. The new one's about to be released, and it will have up-to-date market data about what's being paid by rent. So, sorry, what rent is being paid by pharmacies, so that you know exactly where you sit in terms of in comparison to other pharmacies out there. You can see by shopping centre type, by state, by location, by metro, rural, where you sit, and if your rent is in fact appropriate. Maybe it's that you need to look at a new location. So then we look at why is rent so important. So we're going to look at rent on the impact of pharmacy value. So just a quick refresher on pharmacy value. The calculation for how to calculate pharmacy value or price is quite a simplistic one, which is up there on the screen. Adjusted net profit divided by the capitalisation rate. And the adjusted net profit can also be called the FME, or the future maintainable earnings. The cap rate is based on a number of factors, but the average Australian cap rate at the moment is around 15 to 16%. So we'll use the 16% for our calculations. So we're going to do a bit of an example here. And what I've used for the example is the exact same as that Medici Capital data for the Australian average. So we've got sales of 3.77, rent of 190,000, and then net profit of 400,000. So using those figures to calculate the pharmacy price or value, we're going to use the adjusted net profit of 400,000 divided by the 16% cap rate. Our pharmacy value is about $2.5 million for this business. So nice, simple calculation, easy to do. Now, what happens if we get a rent saving of 10%? So our rent was 190,000. We get a 10% saving, which is 19,000. That means our profit goes up by 19,000, goes to 419,000, 16% capitalisation rate. Our pharmacy value then goes up to 2.6 million. So by just a rent saving of 10%, so $19,000 saving on our rent, our value has increased by 118,000 for the total business, which is a 4.7% increase in total value. And if we look at this graphically, what you can see is that as our rent increases, our value goes down, and it's a linear equation there. So the lower the rent, the higher the value, the higher the rent, the lower the value. That makes sense. But interestingly, in this example, a $1 rent saving will lead to a $6.25 value increase. So for every rent dollar you're saving, your value goes up over $6. So that's why we say rent is a very important figure. Looking at in percentage terms, what you can see is that if we're doing a rent saving of 5%, our total value of the pharmacy will increase about 2.5%. And again, this is all just using that same pharmacy example for that average Australian pharmacy. If we got a rent saving of 30% or 31%, then our pharmacy value would increase by 15%. So your total business value is increasing by 15%. So obviously that's fantastic for you because your wealth is going up, your ability to borrow money is going up. And when it comes to time to sell, you're going to get a lot more for your business. And then of course you get the profit savings in your pocket as well. So huge impacts. Now, on the other side of this, if your rent was to increase by 30%, then that same principle applies, but your pharmacy value would decrease by 15%. So huge impact there in terms of how your pharmacy, the rent, any rent changes impacts on your total pharmacy value. So just one final thing I want to comment on in terms of rent that's really important. Often whenever we're speaking about leases or rent, we always focus on the dollar value, so the current dollar value paying for rent, as well as how long's left on the lease. Something that's really, really important that's often overlooked is the rental reviews. So annual rental reviews will be included in each lease, and they're often done as a percentage. So it might be 1 or 2 or 3% per annum. Could be CPI, which is a good way to do it. It could be market reviews, but that often happens at the end of the term or at the renewal of an option. But what this table shows is it shows the difference between annual rent reviews of 1% through to 5%. So if we start rent, a starting rent for this example is $100,000. If our annual rent review is 1%, by year 10, our rent has increased to $109,000. So not that much of an increase. Looking over to 3%, by year 10, our rent has gone up to $130,000. Okay. Then 5% annual rent reviews, our rent has gone up to $155,000. So what you can see when we look at it graphically is there is a huge difference. I know it seems like a small percentage, but when you annotate that over to 10 years, by year 10, the difference in what you're paying for 1%, which is this darker blue line here, versus 5% annual reviews, which is this lighter rent here, lighter blue line there, is just huge. So really, really critical that you focus on your rent, you pay attention to your lease, even the small percentages you pay attention to, because ultimately they're going to have a really, really big impact on your pharmacy value and the ultimate price you'll get when you sell. Now, I've covered the data. I'm now going to hand over to Phil that's going to cover all the important stuff about the leases, and he's definitely our expert on leases tonight. If there's any questions about the data, definitely reach out to me. And thanks again for having me again along for this presentation. Over to you, Phil.
Great job, Natalie. Now, Phil, are you happy to just keep moving along this path with this screen share?
I'll just try and see if I can. You give me the share. If you give me the share here, continue. I can.
Chapman, try that. How's that look?
Okay. Can you see my screen?
We can.
There we go. How's that, guys?
Great. Go for it, boss.
Here we look. Thanks, Natalie. And look, a ton of stuff there. It's just so intrinsic. That your lease and rental to value and what's going on out there. To cap off and not go over what's been covered already tonight, I really want to emphasize in here what's happened during COVID and what we anticipate post-COVID, and particularly what's happening with the value, as Natalie talked about, the value of your pharmacy business, what's overlaying rents and where rents are going to go, and what we need to work on as an industry is where landlords are at, and it is startling what's happening through COVID and post-COVID. So we'll push on. Okay, so we touched on the pharmacy rental report, valuable document. No other industry in the country, no other retail industry in the country has this data. You need to leverage in, you need to weigh in on this stuff. Guild Digest, you need to participate. The more the participation, the better the information, the more effective you can use it as a tool when you're negotiating your leases. A lot of data tonight about rents per square metre, and by all means, that's a very important metrics, but also remember too, don't get caught up so much on rent per square metre, as it's a great way that landlords measure their success. To measure your success and how the real estate under lease that you have under control performs for you, not you for it, look at your occupancy cost ratio, which Natalie touched on, and that's your gross rent as a percentage of your turnover. To just give you an idea of the results from 2021 into the latest 2022 report, the industry benchmarks that we were working with for the last few years now have sat fairly solid and consistent at between 4.5% and 5.5%, and that's on your total sales. So we'll have another session another time around sales reporting. That's for another time, but there's so much else we could talk about. But what you need to do is be constantly measuring your occupancy cost ratio, not just once or twice, or when you're thinking of selling or at the end of financial year. You should know these numbers constantly all the time to see where the fluctuations are in your business, how the turnover and rent is working, how the land is working for you, not you working for it. And getting caught up in the rent per square meter next door as to how that's performing for you will drive rents up, because the landlord measures his success on a rate per square metre. But great data in the, and there's the averages there. What's happened with landlords? It has gone absolutely berserk. It's gone nuts. Just recently, I've got an example here. We've got a small shopping centre. It's an Aldi and 7 shops. It's sold for a yield of 4.5% or a capitalisation rate of 4.5%. Now, pre-COVID, pre-2019, that would be a 6.5 or 7%. So the values of these properties are going through the roof. Small convenience centres. We've seen a ridiculous capitalisation rate recently for a purchase of a service centre, 3.9%. So it's just gone absolutely nuts, and it's going further into the core shopping centres and some of the small convenience and neighbourhood centres that pharmacies generally occupy. So I've just highlighted those there, but I put up a slide here from APP 2021. So you notice that this is an old slide here, but my presentation there, I talked about what was happening, gave some examples and some reality back in 2021 about where cap rates were going on the value of your pharmacy lease to the landlord and what it represents to their equity and where it was going. We're seeing that was increasing to up to 4 times annual rent. Well, that was last year's slide. This year, I got those figures completely wrong. If you look here, those estimates that I was talking about and those market facts that we were talking about, completely off tilt. What has happened recently in the last sort of 6 to 9 months is we are seeing capitalisation rate, the value of your lease. This is not the value of your business necessarily. This is the value of your lease to the landlord. What's happening is because of everything that John talked about in relation to resilience and the fact that your highest and best use, etc., has bringing down the capitalisation rate and increasing wholeheartedly the value of your lease to the landlord. And what does that mean to them? But what we're looking at here is we're seeing 6.5 times the annual rent in extra equity to the landlord without any extra rent being paid. Move this. So where are the landlords at? Okay, they're looking at the capitalisation rates. They're seeing that the values are going up. They're recapturing asset value post-COVID. We've had an example today where we've had Charter Hall, for instance, and S Centre, which is the group that run Westfield. And we've seen Stocklands have their half-yearly report. Westfield or S Centre have had a turnaround from a loss of $3.1 billion to a profit of $862 million. We've seen Charter Hall earnings are up 9.2%, and they're reporting that further growth they're going to capture through the inflation rates that we're seeing with the CPI indexes, plus also these fixed rental increases that Natalie was talking about and the compounding factors there. And Stockland are the same. They had a statutory profit increase in the last 6 months of 150% based on the fact that during this period, they've collected 97.5% of all the rent that was owed to them. So you can see that the landlords are bouncing back, and they're bouncing back with a vengeance. So they're recapturing asset value. They're looking at interest rates are going to move. So they're looking to buy now, they're looking to sell now. They're looking at their lease portfolio, and they're looking at highest and best use. And the pecking order there is, yes, the full line supermarkets, their cap rates, the Coles and Woolworths, their capitalisation rate and value to the landlord is sitting somewhere between the high 3s into 4s. We're seeing the next best use is pharmacy, then followed by medical centres. So you are the highest and best use. So what does that mean? Well, at the expense of those businesses that are less resilient, and I'm talking about the gyms and the beauty salons, the hairdressers, etc., some of the restaurants and cafes that were shut down or exposed to COVID conditions and regulations, their value to the landlord has gone down significantly. So what's the landlord going to do? They're diving into their highest and best use, the most resilient leases, the most trustworthy documents and contracts they have is the lease with the pharmacy or their supermarket. And they're saying, how can I increase that lease? How can I increase that rent? Because it has a direct effect on driving the value of my property through the roof. And that's what they're doing. They're going to dive into pharmacy, and it's already started. And the next few years, we're going to see this recapture and further recapture of asset value through churning pharmacies and also driving rents into pharmacies. So they're going to drive the yield, the rent, They're going to drive that growth quickly and then go out there and look at selling their assets off. They're revaluing them and they're going off cycle. And just to give you an idea that this is actually happening out there, this is all off-market sales. There was an 82% increase in the last 12 months of retail properties that were sold. That's gone from 91 in the previous year to 166. So what you can see here is investors are coming in, they're buying these properties at a higher price on a lower yield, a lower cap rate, which means once they buy them, they've very quickly got to also, not as a seller, but now as a buyer, they've now got to recapture that and increase the value they can again, so they can pay for these things. So that's what's happening. And it's a tidal wave that is already about to crest on all of us. I just want to touch on this one here. This is a slide I borrowed from Natalie, and thanks Nat, is leveraging on time. We're seeing, again, a lot of inquiries here. I know Natalie's office is, I know some of the other brokers are, but certainly at our office, we're getting a lot of inquiry from members in relation to say, hey, I'm thinking of selling out of fatigue or just had enough or whatever reasons. And they're saying, I need to look at my lease. If you're looking or even thinking of looking to sell in the next 2 to 5 years, you need to be getting your lease fit for sale. As Natalie rightly said, the two factors there that they really go into is your occupancy cost ratio. What's the rent as a percentage of sales? That's one of the key questions. The next one down after all that will be, what's the tenure left? The tenure left is your goodwill. It secures your location and you need to put it in place. What's happening is a lot of pharmacies are going on the market, and the first thing they're doing is making the most fatal mistake of all, is they're advising the landlord that they're going on to put the business on the market. They should be the very last person that finds out. Absolutely the last person to find out that they're on the market. Because if the landlord finds out that the pharmacy or a retail business on the market, they want to get their grubby hands on your value. Okay. You might go to them and say, hey, I want to sell, I need to extend my lease. That's the worst thing you could say, because first of all, they're going to say, well, I'm not going to drop my rent and give you more money as you walk out the door. I'm going to put the rent up because I want to get some of your value back to me because I own the property. So be very strategic before you list. Okay. As important as getting your accounts in order, get your lease in order and get it fit for sale. And certainly you'll get a smoother sale. You'll get a better price through using people like Natalie's group, and you'll get a timely settlement, because the only link left at the end is the landlord receives an advice to say you're seeking to assign the lease, and they've got a statutory period of 30 days to approve it. And I've very rarely seen an assignment from a pharmacy get knocked back. Actually, in 20 odd years, I haven't seen any, if they're done correctly. So, take the landlord out of the equation, please, because they are looking to value add. Don't give them the opportunity to go and say, right, I can ramp the rent into this one and I'm going to get better value out of this and a better passing income. So I just want to touch on that one, because that's what's happening right here, right now. We're getting a lot of phone calls from members saying, hey, think you're selling, what do I do with my lease? First things first, don't tell the landlord. Have a chat to someone in the know, and let's talk about a strategy that can set you up to renew your lease early and get you back on track and actually add value to your business without the landlord knowing. We've got plenty of strategies around that. Now, tonight, I just want to recap on a few things. I know Mark talked a lot about your lease options. I just want to touch on those lease options. And Mark talked about the early determination of market rent. All but WA and ACT legislations have been changed. The last legislation that was changed was Victoria in October 2020, whereby we introduced clauses and rights to lessees in relation to the early determination of market rent. The issue here is you've got to manage your time and critical path. Those notices there are pre your lease option notice period. So at some stages here, if you've got a lease option today, in the next 12 months, today, you need to go and look at that and go and look at your legislation in those states and territories and find out what your notice period is for an early determination of market rent. It's an amazing tool to give you two chops at the landlord at getting the right deal at an option. So please preserve your rights under your option, as Mark rightly said, but also you have a right that's yours and you have to enact it, under early determination of market rent. The other thing I want to talk about, I'm always batting on about this, is time. Okay, and why is it so important to everybody? Look, these are facts. We can't step away from it. 600 to 700 pharmacies will have a lease event in the next 12 months. And what's that based on? The average of leases is 7 years. 15% of the market every year is facing a major lease event. It's either the lease is expiring or there's a lease option. Both are critical events. And you look at that over the next 2 years, and we're talking about with a lease expiry or major event, you should be planning at least 18 months in advance. In the next 2 years, we've got almost 30% of the sector are going to be exposed to market forces and these landlords who are seeking to drive their values through the roof, through the market forces that have come post-COVID. So I'll leave it there. We're running over time. We could go on for ages here. I just remind everybody, this is just a quick snapshot of what you're going to get from us at APP on the Saturday afternoon session. Don't miss it. We're going to give you lots of formulas. We're going to give you a lot of deep, dark secrets out there. And we've got a lot of free tools and resources we've developed with the Guild to get you to manage your time, and we'll automate that and do it for you, no obligation free. So I'll leave it there for questions if we've got time at all, Daniel. Again, thanks, Nat. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, John. Thanks, Mel. And appreciate everyone's time tonight. And it's always hard to be the last man standing again.
Great job, Phil. I love the use of grubby hands. I love how you built that into the presentation. But also good on you for calling yourself out on getting some predictions wrong, because you don't see a lot of experts do that. But for me, what it really did highlight is that nobody really knows what the market's going to do. And it really does underscore the important point that you made earlier on in your presentation about knowing those key figures day in, day out. So a quick question for you, Phil, and then I've got a quick one for Nat as well. Phil, a similar question for you that I asked Mark, and that is that you deal with a lot of businesses. You would see a lot of mistakes in leases, a lot of missteps. What's the most common one you see people make?
You're looking on the screen. Get your head out of the sand, leverage time. With time, we can achieve so many things in getting you a better lease deal. But when you ring us up and say, listen, my lease is due in 6 months, or landlord hasn't contacted me, I'm waiting for them, the clock's ticking, it's all over. Just remember, we actually lease time over space. That's what we do. Okay, the first thing on the front schedule of a lease is the first things there after landlord, lessee, is the commencement and expiry. It is the most critical thing we can leverage. We can't invent it, but we can manage it, and we can use it to our advantage if you give us enough time to do it. So head out of the sand, please.
Great answer. Now, Natalie, you're just taking yourself off mute, so I don't have to remind you. Now, Natalie, you said that one of the first 3 questions a potential buyer will ask you is, what is the rent percentage? And I would imagine that if they're asking that, they've got a little bit of an upper limit or an acceptable number in their head that they think is okay, but they probably don't have as deep an understanding of the entire environment as you do. And so clearly, it's definitely it depends answer on what that number should be and what is acceptable and suitable as a rent percentage figure. So the question I've got for you is, as a broker, what do you do to educate a potential buyer on a specific rent percentage? Because I think you don't just give them the answer and just let them come to their own conclusion.
Yeah, well, we try to lead them in the right direction, Daniel, as always. But generally speaking, in terms of what the market wants, is anything under 6-7% they're okay with. Once it starts getting above that level, there are concerns. But mostly it depends as well on the risk tolerance of the buyer, but also the education and understanding around how to deal with landlords and things like that. We have buyers that come to us that specifically want to deal with shopping centre landlords because they know they can handle it, they know how to manage it, and they do all those things. So the way we present the business in terms of when we're selling it, we'll obviously focus on it's a question that everyone wants to know, those rent percentages. So we focus on all those details and make sure we answer all the buyers' questions and really address what can be done to help that rent percentage and to get the best out of the business moving forward. Because as a buyer, it's not what it's doing now, it's what you can do in the future with it. That's the most important. So we can't forecast anything as a broker, but we certainly want to draw your attention to those issues. But like I said, it's very buyer specific. Some buyers are very comfortable dealing with larger landlords and are attracted to those businesses, so want to do that, and others will stay right away.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And look, all the presenters, Mark, John, Natalie and Phil, thanks again for presenting tonight. I know it's always difficult to sort of juggle life and work and family commitments in the evening. So thanks for giving up your time and sharing your expertise. A reminder to the delegates, the participants, the people tuning in, that we have recorded these sessions, so you will be able to access them later on, and the Guild will be in touch with those links. And of course, speaking of getting in touch, if any of you want to get in touch with Phil, Nat, Mark or John, their details were up on the screen, or just get in contact with the Guild and they'd be happy to make an introduction for you. Also, for those that submitted questions that we didn't have time to cover, thank you. We promise we will get an answer for you, either directly from the presenter that you're aiming your question at, or we may do a little extra recording session offline and get that to you all. So look, I think we've done pretty good. We're only 11 minutes over time across 4 presenters, so about 2 and a little bit minutes each. So thank you very much again. That's about all we have time for. And I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the evening, and I hope to see as many of you at APP as I possibly can. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night.